Hi, I'm Bronwyn Williams, and we're back with the small print. And today our guest is Nick Badminton. As always, we like our guests to introduce themselves. So Nick, tell us about yourself.
About myself. Okay. My name's Nick Badminton. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. I've been living in Canada for quite some time now, about sort of 16 years. I'm a Brit as well. I've been working in futures work for the last decade or so, and sort of started from a community and events-based sort of activity perspective, bringing people together to wonder what comes next. And over the last few years, that's really turned into something that's been a speaking practice, consulting practice, and it's sort of culminated in this place in 2022 where I've written a book called Facing Our Futures that's coming out next year that we'll probably talk about. And I run the Futurist think tank at futurist.com, which Bronwyn's a part of, and hopefully trying to get as many people on that think tank doing work together to try and sort of push boundaries on, what comes next, how we can work with, fairly significant clients, both in government and NGOs and charities and also in private companies to really sort of up their game and think differently about, strategic planning and what foresight and futures design can bring to that.
Well, as you know, we both work in the same industry. We're both known as futurists, or at least billed that way in the various press releases and events that we speak at or invited to participate in. And as you know, as well as I do, and whenever you tell someone you're a futurist, they say, well, what is that? So in your words, how do you describe it when people ask you that question? What is it? What do you do as a futurist, Nick?
So it's actually interesting. In sort of more casual social settings, I just say that I'm in long-term planning, and that sort of kills any crazy hyperbole that's sort of behind the idea of a futurist. I mean, people think that if you're a futurist and that's legitimately what you do for a living, that you're some kind of superhero that can see around the corner, you can predict, you can basically do wonders in terms of thinking about what comes next. But everyone kind of gets it wrong. I always say at the beginning of every keynote and every engagement, this is about speculation. This isn't about prediction. This is about exploration. It's not about strategy, and it's about discipline, and it's not about hyperbole. So it's very much, being a futurist, being a foresight practitioner, a futures designer, as it were, is literally an ability to mix creative thinking with strategic rigor and a sort of an open mind on what might come next by joining the dots between complex systems in the world that we see sort of playing out today. I really love doing what I do for a living. It's difficult to explain to people the value of this, but there have been studies now. Rohrbeck and Crookham have said you're more profitable and you've got higher market cap as a company if you've got vigilance, anticipation, future preparedness. So that kind of helps with that discussion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm an economist by training and a futurist by trade. I never practiced as an economist, but I always find the irony between those two professions quite interesting, because economists do predict the future and futurists really don't. In fact, economists and politicians are all about trying to come up with that base case forecast, right? And our job as futurists is to take you off that base case forecast and to extend that thinking using foresight techniques and to get you off that baseline lowest common denominator standard issue future that we base our planning on in the sort of forecasting cycles, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting what you do, because you're the first person I know that's like an economist and a futurist as well. So I don't know how many people are out there. I've known tons of very, very talented economists, and I've been on lots of agendas at board meetings and whatever, and there's typically an economist, and then there's me. I was down in California. There was Barack Obama's old, his previous economist, and it was great. But I don't know what you find, and I guess you can really serve this need. I get asked questions that people want to ask economists all the time, and they think suddenly, I can talk about, what's going to change in the next couple of years with regards to, grain and fertilizer and the Ukraine conflict and things like that. And I have to very quickly set some expectations that that's kind of not what I'm doing, right?
Right. I mean, I've also got these questions for some of the reasons why I decided to study up on a lot of these subjects, right? So you can talk credibly about those base case futures, even if that's not the vision of the future that you are selling, right? So that's another question that I wanted to ask you before we get into your book, because that's obviously what we really want to get into.
Sure.
Today. And that's more a case of how do you feel about the responsibility about talking about the future? How do you balance? Obviously, you have your own vision of what a good future looks like, with still having an unbiased enough approach to be credible in the space. I think that's probably the biggest challenge of our industry, because expectations set reality. Again, this is something economists understand very well, and they use that against us, right? You know, projecting and predicting recessions and depressions and interest rate forecasts, they nudge reality, they nudge behavior. So how do you balance that? Or do you think that actually you are a bit of an evangelist and you are selling a particular future? Because that's also an option, right?
I never sell a particular future. There's so many narratives out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's many people that do in our space, and I think we kind of lose our usefulness in the industry as soon as we fall into that trap.
Well, I kind of find the people that sell a particular version of our futures, you know, exponential and technology and gene editing and robotics and AI and the green economy, and it's, you know, happening faster than we think, and, you know, more's going to happen in the next 10 years and happen in the previous 300. You know, it's just, it's fine. It's kind of it's showboating ideas and thinking, and I'll put my hands up. Like 10 years ago, I was into that, but I was also into like edge cases. I've always been into edge cases. You know, I've been running an event called Dark Futures for years and years and years, and it's always been about the hidden systems and what might go wrong. And that's, you know, we'll get into that a little bit when we talk about my book as well. So I don't buy into this sort of this good, incredible future, because it always seems to be like a pay-to-play kind of reality where the ultra-rich can live forever in Elysium and suddenly it's all good. You know, there's a reality, and people could say, oh, you know, are you optimistic? And it's like, yeah, but we got to go through and understand the challenges and the struggles. And I remember, I think it was 2019, I wrote a piece for futurist.com for Glenn Heemstra, when, you know, the founder of futurist.com, when he still owned the site, and I obviously acquired it from him. And I wrote this piece about, I always do predictions for the next year, and it always upsets a bunch of futurists, but really, you know, what are some of the signals and how they're going to play out potentially? And, you know, I was talking about the water, energy, food nexus and waste, and you know, platforms like splintering in social media, and the influence of people that you know, that've got millions of subscribers and all of this, but like on the negative as well as the positive as well. So I've never been afraid of that. So, you know, some people sort of come up to me after keynotes and like, that's amazing, I see potential everywhere. And some people come up, and years ago, I was chatting to a government organization here in Toronto, and this two people came up to me. The first person was a young woman that was very early on in her career in government regulations and working in public service. And she was like, I can't work here anymore. Like, what you've shown me is a potential beyond what we're doing. And what we're doing is almost standing still and expecting to be able to regulate something that is so far out of our grasp that, you know, we can't do anything about it. And it was really telling. And I talk about sort of predictive regulations and whatever, and there's some really cool stuff there. The second person came up to me and she was shaking. She goes, everything's changing and I don't know what to do. And, you know,
like,
sort of,
it's too much change.
yeah, I don't know if she drank too much caffeine or anything, but like it was honest. And what was quite interesting about those two conversations is like, what comes next? And I ended up working with that organization to, you know, putting some ideas in place around predictive regulation and doing some future scenario work and whatever. But 6 months later, I was doing, I was the curator for the Waterloo University Innovation Summit. And they brought me on board and I connected them to my network, and we had all sorts of amazing, you know, speakers like CTO of Tesla and people that were like the heads of innovation from like Lululemon, a great friend of mine, Amber Case, that talks about calm tech and a whole bunch of really cool stuff about cyborg anthropology. And this young woman came up to me again, and I was stood next to a friend who's a journalist for Forbes. And she's like, Nick. I was like, hey, how's it going? I can't remember her name now. She was like, I want to say thank you. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, I quit. And now I'm doing a master's in technical entrepreneurship at the University of Waterloo. And like, and my friend was stood next to me, this journalist, who's like, it's like, well, that's kind of the power of what we do. We elicit a reaction, you know, when we're not here to be, you know, and I hate this word, edutainment at lunchtime. at a conference. We're here to like challenge you. And I've been in rooms where I've had standing ovations. I've been in rooms where, you know, literally 100 farmers have sat back, crossed their arms, no applause, no questions, no nothing. Because you go to the core of these industries and you challenge what they've been doing for a very long period of time. And these are tough industries. Like if you're in retail, or if you're in finance, or if you're in agriculture and agri-food, especially, really tough. Every year they're fighting the elements and they're trying to grow food and they're trying to be profitable and a whole bunch of things. And it's really interesting when you elicit those kinds of reactions. So.
Exactly. It is, that is one of the strangest things that you find when you talk about the future. It's a very emotive issue, particularly with people that are quite attached to the present. How do you find some of the more useful techniques involved in getting people to let go of the present? Because the present is receding by definition all the time, and it's always that balance between sort of conservatism and progressivism that is always the challenge within humans, and it's wanting to take the best of the past with us, but sometimes you have to let go of a lot of stuff in order to take hold of what comes next.
It's probably one of the biggest lessons that I had with my practice. You know, I used to write keynotes and stand on stage and profess, you know, at the end, like, welcome to the future, bang, you know, here's a bunch of signals, a bunch of trends. And it's sort of, you know, it was like a fire hose of crazy stuff that's coming, right? When was it? Like 3 years ago, like literally 3 years ago in a couple of weeks. I was in Calgary and I spoke to a room of farmers, 800 farmers. I chat to farmers all the time. It's like, for some reason, I'm like an agricultural futurist, and I love it. I grew up in the farming community. My dad was in the industry for 40 plus years. So I guess there's a you know, strange attractor in the mix there somewhere. And I gave my keynote and I spoke about climate change and weather, electrification and machine learning and robotics and all this stuff that was literally at a future horizon going to come and change the industry of agriculture. And a guy stood up for Q&A. And, you know, people in Alberta in Canada are fairly sort of, you know, known as being direct, right? And they're great people. I love speaking in Alberta. And he goes, I think everything you just said is bullshit. So I'm stood there on stage. And it's like, okay, how do you react to that? I mean, actually, these days, if someone stood up and did that, I would literally shut it down and said, that's a toxic question and I'm not going to answer it. However, you know, back in the day, you're not willing to back down. I sort of realized, you know, okay, why? So I was like, look, why? You know, and he started talking about weather and this, and you didn't talk about nuclear and like this and that and this and that. It's like, well, you're wrong. You know, you can't. You know, yeah, it just seemed that then over the next few minutes, there was a polarity of like, yeah, but this, but that, but this, but that. And by the end of it, you know, we sort of moved on to someone else with another Q&A. It was a really good event. And afterwards, I chatted to the guy and we went back and forth on email for a while until he ran out of any kind of reason to sort of question some well thought through inquiry. And it was fine. And, you know, chatted about, you know, safety around nuclear and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, which is still controversial. So I sort of walked away, and for about 2 days afterwards, I was being attacked by like the agriculture like trolls on Twitter, and they were sending me all sorts of yeah. They were sending me these images of graphs with no real line back to solid data, and it was like, you know, the old climate change of it. But look at the ice age, and it's like, you know, okay, fine, you know, and you know, you don't engage, but I honestly felt like I was beaten up. Anyway, I was flying away for a vacation a couple of weeks later. And I picked up a book in the airport by Rob Hopkins, and it's called From What Is to What If. And it's about community activism and creativity and inquiry and how imagination was going to change the world. And I read the first chapter and I was stunned. And I sort of had to put my hand up and be mea culpa about how I'd been going about things. You know, standing on stage, really smart guy. Here's lots of stuff I found about. Welcome to the future. Goodbye. Round of applause. You know, some people got it. Some people were vehemently against it. And, you know, and I thought that was okay. Anyway, following that, it just registered with me that if you start to frame things, and this is how I frame everything, so and it's in my book and everything, so it's all, and I say Rob Hopkins inspired me for this. Shifting your mindset from what is to what if just means an inquiry and a curiosity, and you can literally say, it's like, yeah, but we're going to be stuck with farming machinery that's going to be dependent on fossil fuels forever. But what if it changes? Let's look at that. Let's have an inquiry together. You literally can't put it down. And it's a recognition that there is a situation and that it might change. And that's kind of what we have to. It was the most powerful thing, I think, that I've added to my practice. And it sucks that sort of that aggressive, combative energy out of a room. And it's like, and I like to sort of stand up and say, just add the word yet to every sentence that you say, like that you're trying to fight against this idea of change. And it's like, there's never going to be electrified, autonomous tractors that can work in swarms and deal with, 1 million acres of harvest yet. So it's so interesting. So the words yet and what if become these tools that they're sort of entry level sort of thinking points to getting into futures and futures work, right? So that was really powerful for me thinking about these things.
It changes the conversation to something that's fixed and inevitable. Again, like shifting off the base case forecasts, like this is the future as presented. I'm an expert, therefore accept this is going to happen. To changing the conversation to something that people can participate in shifting. If you don't like it, again, you have to say, I mean, like this is the trend. These are the data points. These are the signals we've seen. But if you don't like it, if this makes you uncomfortable, then what are you going to do about it? And I had a quite interesting conversation after one of my talks quite recently about AI bias creeping into a whole lot of the algorithms that are guiding and nudging and pointing us towards certain decision-making processes, whether it's the content we consume on social media or it's the goods we buy online. And obviously, like algorithmic bias is a big issue, and there have been very large tomes written by quite important academics on this sort of subject. But after the conversation, an engineer came up to me, and he's an engineer that works in the hardware space. And he said they had actually been looking into this because, again, there's a lot of racial bias that comes in with a lot of the facial recognition systems. And he'd actually been hired by one of the very big tech giants, like in our global system, to try and solve this problem. And what he realized quite quickly is that a lot of the bias was not actually human error. It was not intentional bias at all in the software side of things. Rather, a lot of the bias was actually creeping in when he stepped back and was able to look at the problem from a different perspective from the hardware that we're using, in that the cameras we have simply not been designed to capture the sort of differentiation and the nuance on different skin tones. Like it's a lens problem. It wasn't actually some awful human being that had programmed deliberately, some sort of bias into a thing. And suddenly the conversation shifted from being bad people versus good people to being the hardware is wrong, let's fix it. Like we've identified the problem and we can now solve it. And those conversations are so much more productive. I think that a lot of our conversations are about whether things are good or bad rather than how we can actually fix it. So I think that that's also always for me like a really interesting moment in terms of you change the perspective, you shift the facets you look at, and suddenly you can fix things. You're no longer a passive passenger in spaceship Earth, you're like an active participant of the crew, which is so much more empowering.
I always come back because I talk about tech. I've got a background. I'm a certified technical architect, been doing that for over 25 years. I've built systems like gathering data, doing behavioral targeting, a whole bunch of stuff like way before, Cambridge Analytica and all that, and Facebook, in the old world of direct marketing. And it's kind of really interesting. Today, I like to really strip it back to basic, human principles. We like certainty, variety. We want contribution and growth. We want to connect with people. We want to be in love. And we've been like that for thousands of years. And we're going to be like that for thousands of years looking ahead. So, in one of my slides, I say, what if the batteries run out? What if all of this hardware infrastructure around us just disappears? How does a supermarket work anymore? How does a city work anymore? How does your home work anymore? Because it comes back down to basics of design of an environment and an experience that's deeply human. And people are sort of taken aback. To your point, it's like, you're talking about AI and bias and whatever. Imagine a world without that AI and the cameras and whatever. You've just got like a soup of people that are carrying that bias around with them as well. It's just not aggregated and analyzed, and it can't be interrupted. It's just like quietly in the background, like operating in ways. And some people can see it more obviously than others. And it's interesting. So I always really encourage people to go right back to brass tacks. If suddenly we're looking at the year 2100, what does it mean just to live in the world? And it's not about flying cars. It's about settlements and people and food and water and energy and an ability.
Like it always has been, right? So, I mean, this is the conversation that we have so often. Like when people think about the future, they tend to think of it purely in terms of technology. But technology is probably the least important parts of the human experience. It's designed to accelerate certain things, to give us efficiencies. But at the same time, you can go back and read the Iliad and the Odyssey and recognize those people so clearly dealing with the same real issues that keep us up at night than what we are facing today. And people 100, even 1,000, 2,000 years into the future will still be grappling with the human condition. So it's often helpful to focus on things that won't change and then say, how can technology help us to deal with those things that don't change, as opposed to thinking that this sort of technological future is going to change the very essence of what it means to be human beings. So I think it's a huge mistake with the,
I think we need to frame what technology is as well, right? I mean, technology is
wheel.
It's the flint that people back in the Bronze Age would use. And it's fire. It's the person with the sword versus the person without the sword has got an advantage. And so we kind of forget that this is, every client talks about how do we close that digital divide. There's been divides in humanity since like day one, where the human condition has wanted people to step up and be in charge, and some people to be servile to that. And I don't think that human condition has changed so much. I mean, we live in our houses and in our cities, and we've got the dynamics, and there's capitalism and economy and all these things. But we're literally, living in a world of millions of solutions and millions of pieces of technology, and we're desperately trying to come up for air. We talk about mental health and wellness and all these things. Do your yoga, take it to the mat, breathe, remember to breathe. And it's kind of interesting. I just literally got out of the gym about an hour ago, and it's like, just remembering to breathe is so important, and it's the basic human need. Like that breath is a basic human need. And we've kind of got ourselves in this world that's a mess. And I think coming back to what do futurists do, we're just trying to basically work out what the hell this mess is leading us towards, right?
Yeah, and what do we want to nudge it away from? Because we do have that ability. I mean, we sort of created the world around us to such a large extent. It's very much within our control, which is a very nice way to segue into your book itself. The book is called Facing Our Futures. I have read it. I've been privileged enough to have seen it before it has gone to press and to print. But can you tell us about what the book is? Because I think that set us up quite nicely.
Well, and you're in it as well. We did a little bit of like crazy futures dystopian scenario sort of exploration together.
So you're in it. To start conversations.
Yeah, and you were one of 3 or 4 people that got to read 2 or 3 of the chapters to make sure that I wasn't so far off the mark. So over the years, I've developed a practice, and the practice has obviously been around research, in both primary and secondary research. And I do more secondary research than anything else. Interviewing and podcasts, very much like we're doing today, both giving and producing them, and then running projects and working with these very large companies to work out the dynamics of futures and scenario planning, storytelling, science fiction futures, and whatever. And it was the sort of the jolt in the arm came like twofold. One, I was asked to do a quick keynote for a group of people that were like a splinter group in Singapore one year, away from the World Economic Forum event that they were all attending. So it was a bunch of really smart people. And I did a keynote called Start with Dystopia. And it was based on the idea that why don't we challenge ourselves to start with how bad it can be and think about that perspective from planning, just being provocative, right? And it started off as an essay that was on Medium. And then it sort of became like the opening chapter of The Future Starts Now, which is the book that you and Theo put together with a bunch of futurists as well. And then following that, it's only about 1,300 words or something. It's fairly rudimentary in some of its thinking, but the main sort of foundational elements of thinking about what happens when we do consider bad and good, dystopian with positive. And I had a chat to the editor, and I said, I've got an idea for a book, and I put it together. And I've had a book inside of me for years, and I've tried multiple attempts to work out what that looks like, and it sort of landed in this space, and it was like, no, this could be really interesting. I wrote it out, and a couple of years ago, this editor was like, yeah, I'm going to take this to the editorial board. I'm like, okay. And it was literally a book that was like, okay, let's look at where we are, where we've come from, why we're in the predicament that we're in, and how we can go forward by looking in a holistic fashion at positive future trajectories and dystopian future trajectories. And we can see the opportunities, the challenges, and the risks that drop out of all of these when we apply, differing kinds of principles at the beginning of the process that indicate the story is different, right? It's an incredibly flexible framework. I've tried to make it incredibly simple, I explored a lot of ideas, and I really paid a lot of homage and respect to the people in the futures world that come before us that have been doing a lot of amazing things, like people like Dr. Joseph Voros and James Data at the University of Hawaii, and a number of other people. And actually, there was an incredible community on Twitter up until recently of foresight folks sharing a lot of great ideas. So I got lots of conversations with you and people like Wendy Schultz and Sahil Ayatollah and Chris Rice, and obviously Glenn Heemstra and other people, right? And people like Monica Bielskite really like pushing some boundaries and thinking about protopias, and so it was interesting. So I sort of sat down this time last year. I was in Palm Springs, and I was sat in an office down there, and I wrote 86,000 words in 50 days, and my brain sort of short-circuited at the end, and then went through a pretty rigorous process of editing and some feedback from people like you and others, and it sort of ended up being this 9-chapter with and it's got a forward from Glenn Heemstra that's just I think it's really I like the book, which is a good way to end writing a book, right? But at the same time, I feel that it's very rudimentary and very basic, and definitely not academic, and fairly straightforward. And I always like to read books where you can read a chapter and then walk away. And I've tried to write the book to be that way. But yeah, the book explores a number of different things, and I hope it's a primer, and I hope that it's got a toolkit in it that helps people do futures exploration in a different way.
Yeah, and the target market for the book is really, it's looking at sort of business futures, and it's being published by Bloomsbury Business. So that's with that in mind. But I think that people that aren't necessarily familiar with the futures field often tend to think of it as being quite overwhelming. Like, how do you become a futurist? It's also a question you get asked quite a lot. So I'm like, wait a minute, you're a human being. You are a futurist.
That's right.
Yeah. I certainly found that reading it, that it's probably got a lot of application for individuals who want to learn how to think proactively and optimistically about the future, because quite often the future is framed as something that is done by businesses or by, as you said earlier, the World Economic Forum or by governments, but it's not. It's something that's done very much by individuals. And as you said, the book is not overly academic, which does make it accessible. And that is probably one of my criticisms of the more academic fringes of the futures world, that it becomes completely inaccessible. There's all these rules and jargon you have to do to participate in the future, which is entirely the wrong way to think about it. I mean, that was very much the thesis of our book that we put together, and you definitely continued with that. I think it would be a waste if people don't see this as in something to be applied to your personal life as an individual.
This is it's so interesting. Now we're sort of at the phase, and it's like birthing a whale, writing a book, like writing a book is stressful. How do you get rid of that stress? You write the book. And it's anyone that's written a book, and I never knew this, and I've learned a lot. And the first thing you want to do after writing the book, and the copy editing's done and it's all done, the first thing you want to do is write another book, and you kind of have to stop yourself. And I had an editor like, oh, let's do it. I could literally be signed right now and writing another book, obviously by working with another publishing house. But you have to kind of stop, and you have to realize that actually you've got to marinate in the thinking that you put together, because oftentimes I think whatever you do with your practice, I mean, this book represents a history of me and my practice over the last 10 years. And in fact, the book actually starts with me talking about some, personal history and sort of growing up in rural context, and understanding that, moving to city context and then having a global perspective, a whole number of different things leads to a really important shift in the mindset, right? So writing this book has been sort of that. It's sort of my reference point, and as soon as I've got a copy, and I've sort of got it on the screen here, it's like, no, all the answers are in there right now. If people ask me the questions, I can't remember half the book, so you have to go back because it's dense. It's like 65,000 words, and there's lots of really cool ideas, and there's lots of really cool people. I kind of want people to read the book and find a list of 20 or 30 people that they need to go and seek out and do, and do work with, or read material, and think differently about everything, because through community I've been given this occupation, and the community is the number one aspect of what we do, versus getting paid, walking the stage, being in meetings or whatever, right?
Yeah, that's another interesting sort of dichotomy when it comes to thinking about the future, in that quite often we err on the side of thinking that the future is sort of, it's designed by them and sort of imposed on us, and then we end up in it. So, and that's the first challenge you've got to kind of unpick, which is to say that actually anybody can participate in it. And in fact, everybody is participating in either reinforcing base case forecasts, lowest common denominator futures, or by working actively against them towards a version of the future that they prefer. So you either passively, tacitly endorsing the current worldview, or you are actively working against it, which is individual, which I think the biggest challenge at the moment. There's so much apathy, there's so much dis-optimism. I mean, I know you've recently had a child, I also have a child, but the very fact that there's whole generations worth of women and families that are choosing not to have children, says if we don't see a future, shows that there's an agency and that there is a contribution problem. People don't think that the individual impact has any difference. But that's the one challenge. The other challenge is that although individuals do have some sort of a sway, that you do get to either vote for or against the current order or something else, it's still, humanity is a team sport, right? So you still have to work together to actually get anything done, which is like a bit of a paradox, but it's two challenges that you have to address in slightly different ways, because these all take collaborative solutions. And I'm glad you brought up Monica too, because I think her thinking has evolved in quite interesting ways over the last couple of years too, in that regard, in that protopias have become more, at least the topic, the way she speaks about it, has become once again more pragmatic, right? It's not just about being optimistic, it's also about being sort of practical and like, okay, what are you going to do about this? Are we going to stop talking and start doing? And if we are going to start doing, how are we going to work together? And that's a whole different challenge altogether. And I don't know if you have a view on that from working with corporate clients, on how to get people to see that even as our job is to give people agency to solve their own problems and to work towards a future or futures that make more sense to them, that people also need to see they're part of a bigger system, and that my choices have impact on you, particularly in a corporate sense. How do you balance those two things? Like, that's the change management sort of part of futures, which is so much harder, as you said, than just saying, oh, look at all the shiny new trends and technologies, cheers, goodbye. When you start wanting to get involved in change management, you have to get people to start acting towards change, but you also have to then say, wait a minute, have you thought about the externalities that you are imposing in pursuit of that? And that's also a huge responsibility in our world.
Yeah. To affect change, I always say this. To affect change, I always say this, and it's, you need to be brave and confident, and you need to also highlight the holes in the picture that you don't have answers to, and you have to have stamina. So about 3 weeks ago, I was with a client, and it was a very large city, very significant city, and we were in a room, and I was using my positive dystopian canvases. They're all around the room, and they were looking at different areas of city life, and they were looking at everything from logistics and transportation through to like community and urban planning, through to like using data, using artificially intelligent systems and whatever. And I was brought in, and after 3 hours, everyone was sat down, and they were completely tired, and they hadn't really thought across department, and there were people from all the departments that run a city, like emergency services and infrastructure and transportation and roads and community services and social security, whatever. And I was just writing up, like last night, writing up the session. It's like, God, this is hard work. It's hard work writing up, because you've got all of these people that have suddenly pushed everything out, and literally it's like therapy in a way, and really looking at these future horizons where there are no limitations that you find today, and you can say, okay, in 2037 the dynamics are going to be like this. It's very tech focused because it's a city, and obviously by its very nature cities are tech, right? But we were running the exercise, and we didn't get to the final part, which is about backcasting strategic considerations, because they just didn't have any more energy. But they all, like, suddenly you could just see a difference in how they were looking at the world in a way, and how they were suddenly connecting the dots. Neo in the Matrix, I know kung fu, and suddenly it's like, whoa, and it's like, and it's interesting, and when I was writing up this session yesterday, and I'm nearly done, and it's like chewing through leather, because it's such a dense amount of material. There's like one summary that's all of these strategic considerations that have dropped out at the bottom of the process, that is like, oh, here's your roadmap for the next 15 to 20 years. Are you brave enough to step up and start to really get into this and consider this and work out what you need to do today, and the kinds of investments that you need to make in research and development and innovation, and you're willing to have conversations with your community that the rich people want to live here, and the challenged communities, they live here, and it's suddenly everything's on the table for consideration and reconsideration, right? So when you come to like thinking about these futures and whatever, I just think that that's really important. It's like bravery, stamina, the ability to bring people together. But it's hard. Organizations feel that it's hard. This client is like, yeah, and we're going to take this, and they've got these big canvases that I've designed for them, and they're going to use them again and again. That's fantastic. But they're only going to get really good at this if they keep going on and doing it. It's not just like a slide or two in a strategy deck. Oh, that was useful. It's like, no, this is a practice. I mean, my book has got a chapter called Futures Consciousness, and it's the final chapter. And it's literally about establishing a capability in your organization around futures. I make a point of asking all of my audiences, especially with really large corporate clients, and especially down in the States, to sit there and answer the question. It's like, hands up if you have a futures design or foresight capability active in your organization. And without fail, no one puts their hands up. We are nowhere. I mean, we got to be careful of our little echo chamber in futures world. We're doing this amazing things and whatever. The people that we work with, the case studies we have, it's so rare that people are doing futures work, even though it's wildly valuable. And, the clients that have stepped up are really having a huge amount of benefit. Like, we should be
competitive advantage. I love to say that the future is a huge competitive advantage, because no one's thinking about it. Like, there's no one there.
Huge.
They're dragons, right? But not competitors.
Yeah. So I following this recording, I'm going to be recording another a quick video for a software company that I'm advising. And that software company is doing some really cool stuff with regards to voice and voice analysis and whatever. And they brought me on as an advisor. And they're like, can you say something that's going to get investors jazzed about who we are to help us with fundraising, whatever? It's like, yeah, no one's doing this work. And if you do this work, you end up having a better view of where we're likely to have an impact, you know, in 10, 20, 30 plus years. If you have that view, suddenly everything changes. And it's, you know, even the companies out there, you know, I always talk about, you know, do futures work, bolder visions, strengthen strategic planning, anticipate risks. That's the three things. And building bolder visions. I worked with a company at the beginning of the pandemic, a startup. I said, what's your vision? They're like, well, you know, we want to have this solution that helps these people. It's like, that's not a vision. I was like, where do you want to be?
That's like a management speak vision.
Yeah.
It fits onto like the Porter's 5 models.
It's like, buy our product. Like, that's our vision is to sell our product. You know,
yeah,
and it's
shareholder value. That's a great vision.
Sell our product, make money, save money, whatever. And I sat down, it's a great guy called Michael. And he actually helped me like really pioneer some of the early workshop stuff. Actually, we got some government grants beginning the pandemic, some really cool stuff. And where do you want to be in 5 years? And it's literally like, you know, the tech response is, well, we want to exit. It's like, okay, fine. You want to sell it, you want to make some, great.
You want to get rich, you want to retire rich young. Okay.
So we went through and we had some of the boards of directors, some of their advisors, some of the team members, and we did this 3-hour workshop. We went through and I did, you know, sort of looking at signals and trends and whatever. And they actually have developed something that's got 20 plus years sort of like perspectives on what they're doing and how they're changing things and whatever. And the entire company reinvigorated. So I went back and I chatted to him about 3 months later. They'd sort of rejiggered the board. About 4 or 5 members of the board were gone. New members had come in. They'd completely reconsidered how they were doing service, how they were having a relationship with the people, what the functionality of their platform would be going forward, with this bigger vision around like what they're going to give to the world. And it was like, that's it. That's it. I mean, it's so satisfying to see people do this. That you know. We're in a continual struggle to tell the world what we can do and what we can do for them and how they can do this for themselves. And it shocks me that it's so difficult to convince people, right? But it always takes like a bright spark in an organization to be the champion, and then suddenly, you know, it changes everything, you know.
Well, that's the interesting thing, like listening to you speak there, like you're talking about like when a company is excited about a long-term vision, about a legacy, something big in themselves, it solves all the problems that we hear with our more immediate short-term bias, like day-to-day conversations we have with clients and companies. Everyone is wondering how to attract and retain talent, particularly young people. Everyone is wondering how to survive the coming sort of energy crunch or whatever the case is, the next season of inflation. Everyone is worried about all of these things, which would all be solved with longer term thinking, but you still change to shorter term incentives. Right. So I think that like almost all the work we do becomes unraveled when you understand that both at a sort of a political side, the state side, and at a corporate side, we simply don't have incentives in place to give people what they want, which is terrible. But also like that's the underlying problem that unravels everything you said. It does take a particularly special champion within an organization and a particularly special organization to try and work against the incentives that we have in place. When the incentives for shareholders, for board members, for employees, for employers are all tied to very short-term revenue cycles, right? And even if you change things within your own organization, even if you have that individual who's prepared to actually invest in their career with the company because they believe in what they're doing, rather than someone that's just looking for the quickest exit point, and who can blame any employee for looking for a quicker exit point to earn a higher income somewhere else, right? Because that's what they're incentivized to do at an individual level. The organization is tied to their shareholders, but even if the organization has internal champions and manages to get like a workforce excited about working together, which is such a naturally human thing to do, you're still competing against the global stock market, which is not forgiving of long-term shareholder value when they've got, you know, FTX to invest in and try shoot to the moon next week, right? So it's almost like the challenge is so big in terms of the work that we're trying to do, although the prize is so big too, right? There's so many things stacked against really allowing people to do what people really want to do. Everyone wants to leave a legacy. Everyone wants to leave the world a better place, except for the very few, very strange, very bad people that are there. But they're definitely not the majority. Most people want to do good things and be remembered for doing good things and for doing good work. But we simply just don't have a system that supports that. And how do we change that? And I think that you kind of alluded to it a bit earlier when you spoke about that futures capacity, that futures capability within organizations. But in order to make it successful in organizations, in order to make it like a stable equilibrium and like work with all these systems that we have, we probably need to start at a societal level even younger. And that's where the sort of signals are quite hopeful, coming from places like Australia, which is starting to put like foresight into the school syllabus. You know, like we have to actually change society to allow people to think about the future again, because everything is stacked against people thinking ahead right now. It's almost like a page in the present.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke at the conference. The first in-person conference I went back to was in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was in March this year. It's a really great lineup. It was with a large client called Waste Management, like very, very large, like 70 billion American dollar revenue company. And there's a chap who chatted before me, a guy called Paul Pulver, and he was kind enough to give me an endorsement for my book. He's the ex-CEO of Unilever. You know, if you're going to find anyone that's going to have an impact, someone like Paul. Anyway, he's no longer at Unilever, and he works he's the sort of the co-founder of an organization called Imagine, and he works with world leaders, you know, everyone from UN to large company leaders, to try and rethink how they operate and whatever. And he said that, you know, they did some research, and he's like, okay, in the room, it's like, you know, he did a poll. He's like, you know, what's the average tenure of a CEO before they get recognition for their performance and their you know, contribution to a company? And it was shocking. It was like 14 months. It's like, so this is it. It's endemic, you know, shareholder value. It just, you know, all of this, you know, when you're beholden to these markets, you're stuck, you know, in this world of short-termism, and it's really, really caused a huge amount of issues.
Down. Even if economics doesn't trickle down, the short-termism surely does.
You know, in the 1800s, like, so 13 countries from Europe get together to have the Berlin's conference, and they divide up Africa. What are they thinking about? They're thinking how we can make as much money as we can, and they don't actually consider anything about the people living in Africa, or, you know, or the economy as a whole. It's like, you know, there are just so many examples over time of people just making, you know, WeWork, you know, or
didn't they just get some more money because we don't learn our lessons?
Fine, you know, but like, you know, I've got a question to ask you, Bronwyn. Who, you know, can you name a CEO that truly is a crusader for long-term thinking, and like puts their money on, you know, on the barrelhead, and their incentives are based on long-term action?
Well, that's the uncomfortable conversation, because that points us in the direction of the sort of the big bad billionaires, the bad boys of you know, like Silicon Valley, which, for better or for worse, whatever you think of those gentlemen, and everyone, we don't even name their names, everyone knows who they are. They basically have thrown the die into the base case scenario of the future, is they are investing in things that don't have direct shareholder value. You can even talk about Elon Musk buying Twitter. He's doing that for some reason other than cash, because he's clearly not going to make money off it. And if you look at the likes of Bezos and all the rest of them wanting to set up space colonies, they're putting money into plans that are not going to necessarily have a shareholder value, but they're doing it because they can. So it's not to say that I think there's a conversation to be had there about privilege, right? I mean, like, I have these conversations about sustainability, which I know is something that you talk about a lot, but you're talking to a privileged, largely developed economy market, whether you're talking in Europe or whether you're talking in the Americas. And I'm trying to talk about sustainability to people who are worried about actually finding enough money for food, for survival, right? And like, you have to have a certain amount of stability and a certain amount of wealth in order to make healthy choices. And I'm talking about even just in terms of, buying low quality foods that will fill your belly, but will not actually give you the nutrition you need to live a long, healthy life is a privilege, right? Also at a societal level, it's a privilege to purchase healthily in terms of the health of society and the planet. Like if you are really poor, you're not able to choose between the sort of the high quality artisan, ethically grown, fully cotton outfit that a more privileged person has the choice to do. You're just going to purchase something that's going to keep you warm and keep the rain off when you don't have like a roof over your head. You know what I'm saying? And then you can scale it up even more in terms of the longer term thinking is very much a privilege of people that don't have to play by the rules of the short-termist shareholder value game, because they don't have to worry about literally paying their bills at the end of the month or paying their workforce at the entrepreneurial level. We tend to sort of point blame at the middle of the market a lot. People that are just on the edge of middle class, we say like, oh, naughty, buying clothes from Shein or H&M. Meanwhile, you can't really afford to buy the really luxury stuff, right? We point fingers at middle entrepreneurs, like, why aren't you thinking further ahead, small business person? And it's because the way our systems are stacked, it's a privilege. The ability to make healthy and longer term choices has become something that we have to pay for, which is also a very big problem with our systems, right? I mean, I don't have the solutions here, but that's why when you ask those questions, it's uncomfortable. People that are talking about the future are the richest, most powerful people in the world because they have the luxury to do that. And we have to change that. The future shouldn't be a luxury, it should be a base case sort of human right, right?
This is where I think the word disruption comes into the mix. And I know it's overused, but I still think it's really important. Disruption is just a stronger version of change, right? So disruption is going to come in and vigorously change things. Yeah, exactly. I talk about disruption and despair. If you look at James Datour's sort of, for futures, continuation, limits and discipline, and you're either transforming or you're collapsing, right? But you've kind of got this reality around limits and discipline, collapsing and transforming, which is about, that finding the despair in collapse and also finding the disruption in transformation. And the transformation that comes from disruption, disruption's kind of been used in technology, like this tech platform is going to disrupt that tech platform. No, it's not. So I'm just writing a piece of work, and I'm going to be presenting it, and it's about fast fashion. So you brought up H&M and Shein and whatever, and it's not about, everyone needs to buy higher quality haute couture goods that are in their wardrobes for years versus a year. That's not accessible. Like, the $1,000 Rick Owens t-shirt is not accessible. Like, you're not doing it. You need to pay the rent. You got to feed your family, right? And when I start to think about it, it's like in the edges, there's solutions that are already becoming hugely popular. Resale clothing. And like, there's lots of really cool stuff there, and it's growing faster than the actual production of new clothing. Urban farming, growing, vegetables on urban land where that typically isn't used, or, whether it's in, actually in the ground in greenhouses or whatever, places like D-Town Farms in Detroit. Because, there's a reality that the majority of people that are on the breadline or below it in America were basically getting their nutrition from dollar stores in really, really bad food, like bad food and soda and candies and sugar and processed food or whatever. So this idea that we have to buy that change, and we have to look, and this is what I do. I think about very basic disruptive ideas around changing what we do in a simple way. Right. And I find it fascinating as I sort of chat to people, because it's like, it's quick and easy to be able to make some of these changes happen, but it jolts against that. Well, we need to have rigor. We need to think about things. We're going to think about this strategically. It's like when the pandemic started, how many people started curbside pickup in a day, or delivery services in a day? Oh, yeah. Whereas they'd normally be like, we need a team and let's get together. Let's think about the implications. This needs to go up. There need to be like 15 signatories. And ultimately, then we need to decide if it's good for shareholder value. It's like, no, the business is either going to survive or it's going to die by these conditions, right? So I think that urgency needs to come in as well.
Yeah, and doing what you can with what you have, at whatever level of the sort of scale there is. Yes, there's a truth there's some degree of truth that the more time and money you have, the more time and space you have to play with and to make big impacts on the future. But that's not to say that you can't be making that time to work on your business, not just in your business, even if you are a smaller business owner, even if you're not a giant CEO that has a sort of infinite bank balance to draw from, right? Like you can do this at scale, and it does make a difference. It will make you more competitively fit within your own sphere.
Yeah. And this comes back to futures, right? So for my entire career, I sort of graduated from university in 1996. And I went straight out. I actually worked in a satellite company at the beginning, so go figure. But then worked across a whole bunch of different industries. But I always had a mantra. It's like, do something. Do something. Do something today. Do something today. Because I just found that there was this structural incompetence, an inability to make a decision and to do something. And maybe this is the reason I've had so many jobs and tried so many things and whatever. Because do something. Challenge people. Be direct. Even companies like Amazon are kind of got this codified in their mantras, day one versus day two. Day one, we're always a startup, we're always innovating, we're always thinking about new things, right? Day two is stasis and a long, slow descent into obsolescence and eventual death. And I love that, right? I mean, it's like, just do something. And it's the same with futures. It's like, okay, we've got all of this, and it's like, okay, that's good, and maybe we'll tell some stories, but it's like, yeah, what are you going to do? And in my book, the backcasting piece is to bring those ideas of futures back to make a decision today. And a lot of people in the foresight and futures world are like, whoa, we don't do that. Whoa, this is futures. No. If you can't link it back, it's absolutely useless. It's a piece of science fiction and nothing more.
Then you're a storyteller. Then you are edutainment, and you deserve to be treated.
And that's fine. So that's fine.
Okay. There's a room for that. They should be jesters in the world too, right? And if that's the role you play, that's the role you play. But I think that both you and I want to be part of some sort of change making, even if it's not selling or promoting our particular view. We want to be part of rattling those cages and getting people to think, is this what you want? And if it's not, what are you going to do about it, right?
Yeah, and go to your consumers and go to people that are young and old and people that are the top of the bell curve and on the edges, right? Go to all of them and ask them what they want and how they want it to work, and do they like you? Do they not like you? What is it they do and don't like about you, right? Go to this, and it's really interesting when you do that. I think that public inquiry and the inclusion of public in the way that you run your company is wildly ignored. And I think
it's a radical idea, isn't it? Get to know the people that you're actually selling to, right?
It's crazy.
We do these immersion tours too, and it's always like, I had no idea people lived like that. I mean, we're talking about 5 kilometers away from your offices.
I tell a story about an experience I had at a conference, and it was an innovation panel, and it was cool, and I was looking out over the crowd. I was like, I'm going to ask a question, who here involves children in decision making and consultation at the board level? And one woman put her hand up at the front. I was like, okay, about 250 people, just one person. So okay, interesting. And then I said, okay, who involves the elders in their community? People that are older, that are retired or whatever, who involves them? Same woman put her hand up. I was like, what do you do? She goes, I work with the First Nations in Canada, in Indigenous populations. We know that everyone's got a right to have a voice, and everyone needs to be consulted, and everyone's part of this idea of today and what comes next in our futures. And it was like, and I'm like, this is it. And, you've seen companies like Gucci, I'm going completely the other end. I've got a shadow board of young people that then help them decide where they should be going, and they're more profitable because it's like, okay, this is it. It's inclusive. Futures is inclusive, and it has to be that way in organizations. And organizations have ultimately, and governments have become ultimately myopic. And it might be because of the processes and bureaucracy that are in place. It might be because they're just not interested. And it might be because they're not incentivizing the people in their organizations to be the change that makes the world a different and better place.
Yeah, that's about it, right? So you got to incentivize good behavior, and we've got to change the structures, but we can only do it with our own sphere of influence. But we've got to start there, right? We have to we have to claw back our agency, what we have. If you don't use it, you lose it. I think that's a pretty good point to end this, because I know you've also got to get to your next interview or whatever, stopping your virtual tour. So I wanted to end this off by saying, if there's one, I want to ask you two questions. Firstly, if there's one thing that you hope readers will get out of reading your book, what is the one thing you hope people that have put it down will do or think or say to someone else? What is the action you hoping to get out of it? And the second thing is, of course, when can people read the book and where can they find it?
Sure.
Or how long will I have to wait?
Okay, if you read the book and you put it down, and suddenly you're looking at the world with slightly different eyes, and you realize that there are multiple futures, there's a plurality of futures, and that holistic planning, where we must think about both positive opportunities and also negative and dystopian trajectories that really start to help us to look at how bad things can get, whether it's in politics, technology, community planning, or whatever. Just to be sort of the vanguards of those ideas, futures and holistic planning. And if people walk away with just those two ideas and they apply some of the ideas, even just asking, what if the world was different? I think that my job is done. The book's going to be everywhere, all of your favorite bookstores. I'm going to say support your local bookstores where you can. Obviously, it's available on the big platforms like Amazon.
Well, directly from the publisher, right? I mean, it's done by Bloomsbury, so you can pre-order through them. Yeah,
and directly from the publisher. And right now there's discounts on it. Last week I hit the Amazon hot new release list. It's not out until February the 14th. So, Valentine's Day, it's the gift of dystopian thinking, right? But people are pre-ordering, and people are pre-ordering it a lot. And a lot of my clients I'm speaking to next year, they are they're buying boxes and boxes and boxes of it, and I'm going to do some signings. But people are jazzed, people are excited, and I'm excited about it. So hopefully, when people read it, they're going to like it. So that's the next thing. But I'm excited. It's exciting times.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And Nick, where can people get hold of you if they want to continue this conversation, work with you, ask you questions, invite you on to another show? How can they get hold of you before I let you go?
Yeah, there's only two Nikolas Badmintons in the world. There's myself, and there's someone in South Africa, and we got different spellings. We look completely different, but you can find me on LinkedIn, obviously. Choose the right one, and then you can find me at futurist.com. So I run futurist.com with Glenn Heemstra, and you're part of the think tank with a number of other fantastic thinkers. There's also nicholasbadminton.com. I'm all over YouTube. I'm on Twitter, less so these days, so don't rely on that as a source. But you can find me. Just hit me up, and nicholas@futurist.com. You can find that, and maybe you put that in the description when you release this.
Absolutely.
Release this podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. We're really looking forward to sharing your book with everyone. As I said, I had to stop myself from sharing it for people at my office. Gotta wait for the real deal until they go. But it's full of very useful tools to think about the future, and not only from an organizational perspective. I encourage people to read this to approach your own life, to think about using these tools in your personal life, because that's probably actually what's going to give you the most fulfillment. And we've touched on that in this conversation, that it's the real human issues are things that stay the same, and these are things that we should be thinking about and can be thinking about better using these tools. They're not just designed for corporates, they're also designed for people, because corporates are made up of people, right? Yeah, for sure. So anyway, read the book, pre-order it, and look up Nick if you want to continue the conversation. He's always shares very interesting things on his newsletter. I'd encourage you to subscribe to that too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bronwyn.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and rate us on all your preferred podcast platforms. If you'd like to find out more about what we're doing, please join our Substack community via the link in the comments below. And as always, we'd love to hear your suggestions for future guests and conversation topics.